The first sound wasn't a knock. It was a scrape like a burlap sack full of heavy stones being dragged across her porch. Josephine Reed, alone at the edge of Serpent's Tooth Canyon, froze. The wind howled, rattling the single-pane window of her cabin, a sound so constant she usually ignored it. But this was different. This was the sound of a heavy body collapsing. She grabbed the rusted shotgun by the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She cracked the door open, and the wind tore it from her grip, slamming it against the wall. There, face down in the mud, was a man. And the world was about to change. Josephine "Josie" Reed was a woman defined by the land she refused to surrender. Her small ranch was wedged into a high cleft of Serpent's Tooth Canyon, a place the locals called Dryden's Folly, because only a fool or someone with nowhere else to go would try to make a living there. Josie was both. Her late husband, Robert, had believed in the spring that trickled from the rocks behind the cabin, a sliver of life in the high desert. Since he'd passed, that spring was the only thing keeping her and her meager herd alive. It was also the only thing Bartholomew Dryden wanted. The storm that night was a monster, a churning mass of black clouds that had swallowed the mountains whole. Rain and sleet hammered the tin roof, a deafening drumbeat that promised flash floods and washed-out trails. Josie was stoking the last embers of her fire when the sound came, a scrape, a thud, a terrible final sigh that was stolen by the wind. She wasn't a fool. This canyon was home to rustlers, desperate men, and worse, Dryden's hired hands. Opening the door was an invitation to death. But the sound, it was one of utter finality. Her hands, calloused and rough, trembled as she grabbed the old shotgun. She lifted the bar, opened the door just a crack, and the storm threw it wide open. He was there, splayed out. A lone horseman, or at least he had been. His horse, a magnificent black stallion, stood 20 feet away, head bowed, steam rising from its lathered flanks, its leg bent at an unnatural angle. The man himself was a heap of mud-soaked duster and denim. He had fallen against her door, and it seemed had died there. "Mister," Josie yelled over the wind. No response. Cursing herself, cursing the land, cursing the man for choosing her doorstep, she jammed the shotgun into the crook of her arm and stepped out. The sleet stung her face. She knelt, rolling the man over. He was alive, barely. His face was a ruin of bruises and cuts. His breathing was a shallow, wet rasp. He was a big man, and she was 5'4" of weathered sinew. Getting him inside would be a miracle. "You picked a bad night, mister," she grunted, grabbing him under the arms. It took her nearly 10 minutes. She dragged, heaved, and slipped her boots, finding no purchase in the slick mud. The man groaned a low animal sound of pure agony. Finally, she hauled him over the threshold and slammed the door, shutting out the screaming wind. He lay on her floor, a puddle of muddy water forming around him. He was unarmed. No gun belt, no rifle in the scabbard she'd seen on his horse. That was odd. Stranger still was the quality of his boots. They were ruined, but they were high-quality leather, the kind she hadn't seen since the bankers came from back east. She lit a second lantern, the flickering light illuminating his face. It was a strong face, or had been, before it was beaten. A square jaw, a broken nose, dark hair matted with blood and dirt. He looked to be in his late 30s. Josie was a practical woman. She got the whiskey bottle, not for him, for his wounds, and a bucket of water from the rain barrel. She cut away his shirt. Her breath hitched. His torso was a map of purple and black bruises. His ribs were clearly broken. But it wasn't the beating that held her gaze. It was a brand high on his left shoulder. It wasn't a ranch brand. It was a crest, intricate and official-looking, though she couldn't place it. He began to mutter, his eyes rolling back in his head. The ledger. Red Creek. Find... The ledger. Josie sighed, dipping a rag in the water. You ain't finding anything tonight, mister. Tonight you just worry about breathing. Outside, his horse gave a pained whinny. Josie looked at the man, then at the door. She picked up the shotgun again and a length of rope. She tended to the man first, cleaning his wounds as best she could. He had no bullet holes, which was a blessing. This was a beating, methodical and brutal. When he was as stable as she could make him, she put on her oilskin coat and faced the storm again. The stallion was still there, shivering, its leg clearly snapped. She approached it slowly. It was a fine animal, and its eyes were terrified. Josie did what had to be done. The gunshot was a flat, dull crack against the roar of the storm. It was a mercy. She returned to the cabin, shaking chilled to the bone. The stranger was still unconscious. She slumped into a chair, the shotgun across her lap, and watched him, wondering what kind of trouble had just collapsed on her doorstep. Daylight came thin and grey, the storm having broken, leaving a world washed clean and cold. The man was still breathing his fever, hot to the touch. Josie had spent the night alternating between dozing in her chair and pressing cool, wet rags to his forehead. She knew she should ride to town to Dryden's Folly and get the doctor. But she couldn't. The doc was a drunk, and more importantly, he was Dryden's man. Any word of a stranger at her place would bring Hank and the boys sniffing around, and this man, whoever he was clearly running from someone. Bringing Dryden's attention here would be signing the man's death warrant, and likely her own. So she waited. She splintered his ribs as best she could, using torn sheets. She forced sips of willow bark tea between his cracked lips to fight the fever. He muttered in his delirium. Names, places, auditor, he said clear as a bell. Wallace, the governor, fraud. Josie froze. The governor. This was high-level trouble, far above the canyon's petty land feuds. This man wasn't just a drifter. On the third day, the fever broke. He woke slowly, his eyes flickering open. They were a deep, clear blue, and they were sharp. He scanned the room, cataloguing every detail, the shotgun by the door, the leaking ceiling, the sparse pantry. His gaze landed on her. Where? His voice was a dry croak. My cabin. Serpent's Tooth Canyon. Josie said, ladling broth from a pot. You collapsed. 3 nights ago. He tried to sit up, but a sharp intake of breath and a wince of agony stopped him. My horse. Josie met his gaze steadily. His leg was snapped. I'm sorry. He's not suffering. The man's eyes closed. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He nodded once. Thank you. He looked at her again. Why? Why what? Why help me? You don't know me. I could be a... He coughed. A cutthroat. Maybe, Josie said, bringing the broth. But you were beaten, not shot. And you had no gun. Seemed to me you were the one who got cutthroat or otherwise. Now drink. He drank, his eyes never leaving her. My name is Jonah. Josie Reed. You live here alone. Since my husband passed. It's hard country. He observed, his gaze drifting to the patched walls. It's my country, she said, a sharpness in her voice. My land. My water. A silence settled between them, not comfortable but not hostile. It was a silence of 2 people who understood survival. Later that afternoon, the trouble she'd been expecting arrived. A shadow fell across the doorway. Josie's hand went to the shotgun, but it was too late. Hank stood there, framed in the doorway, blocking the sun. He was Bart Dryden's foreman, a big, slovenly man with a cruel streak and tobacco-stained teeth. 2 more of Dryden's men sat on their horses behind him. Well now, Josie, Hank sneered, his eyes sliding past her to the cot. "You got company." "He's sick, Hank. Found him on the trail," Josie said, stepping in front of the cot, the shotgun now held loosely at her side. "That's so." Hank swaggered in, ignoring her. He looked down at Jonah. "He looks half dead. Who is he?" "Name's Jonah." Jonah's voice rasped from the bed. Hank laughed. "Just Jonah." "Well, just Jonah. This here is private property. Belongs to Mr. Dryden." "This is my property, Hank," Josie snapped. "Deeded and paid for. Now get out." Hank's smile vanished. He took a step toward her, his hand dropping to the pistol on his hip. "Mr. Dryden has been making you a very generous offer for this pile of rocks, Josie. He's a patient man, but his patience is wearing thin, especially when he hears you're harboring stray dogs." He spat on her floor. "Who'd you run from, Jonah? What's your game?" Jonah's blue eyes were cold fire. He said nothing, just stared. The silence unnerved Hank more than any threat could have. "You get him out of here, Josie," Hank said, backing toward the door. "Mr. Dryden is coming to see you himself tomorrow. He expects to sign the papers. If this trash is still here, well, he won't be happy." Hank tipped his hat in a mocking gesture and left. The sound of their horses faded. Josie's hands were shaking. She set the shotgun down. "You have to go," she said, not looking at him. "I can't," Jonah rasped, trying to sit up again. "Not yet. He's coming. Dryden." "You don't understand," Josie said, her voice cracking. "He's not just a man. He is the canyon. He owns the sheriff, the bank, the town. He wants my water. And when Bart Dryden wants something, he gets it. He's a thief," Jonah whispered, his eyes burning with a sudden terrifying intensity. "He's a vulture," Josie corrected. "And he just saw two weak animals. Us." Bartholomew Bart Dryden arrived the next day, not with the thuggish menace of his foreman, but with the sickening polish of a politician. He rode a beautiful palomino and wore a tailored suit, a pearl-grey Stetson shading his face. He looked like a gentleman, which made him all the more dangerous. He dismounted, handing his reins to Hank, and walked onto Josie's porch. He even wiped his boots on the mat. "Josephine, my dear," he said, his voice a smooth, deep baritone. He removed his hat, revealing perfectly combed silver hair. "I came as soon as I heard you had an unexpected guest. I was worried for your safety." Josie stood in the doorway, shotgun in hand. "I'm safe enough, Mr. Dryden. Please," he smiled. "Call me Bart. We're neighbors." He motioned to the valley below. "All of this we neighbors share, and I've come to finalize our little arrangement. For your own good." "It's not for sale." Dryden's smile tightened by a fraction. "Josie, be reasonable. This is no place for a woman alone. The winters are brutal. The work, back-breaking. I am offering you a fine sum. Enough to buy a beautiful little house in town to live in comfort. Why hold on to this? Dust. It was my husband's. It's mine. And you don't want the dust. You want the spring." Dryden chuckled a dry, unpleasant sound. "Water is life, my dear. It should be shared. My herds are thirsty. Your little spring could water half the territory if properly managed. You're being selfish, hoarding it." "I'm surviving," Josie shot back. "For how long?" Dryden's voice lost its warmth. It became as cold and hard as the canyon rock. "I own the bank that holds the note on your feed bill. I own the man who sells the seed. I am this canyon, and you are one small, stubborn woman." He stepped closer. "And now," he said, his voice dropping, "you are harboring a fugitive." "He's a sick man, not a fugitive." "Is he?" Dryden glanced past her into the dim cabin where Jonah lay still watching. "Hank told me about your guest. A man with no name, no gun, beaten half to death. That sounds like a man who crossed the wrong people. People like me. Dryden pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket. It was a deed of sale. Sign this, Josie. Take the money. I'll even be generous. I'll have my men escort Jonah to the town doctor. We'll forget this whole unpleasantness. And if I don't, Dryden's mask of civility finally dropped. His eyes, a flat, dead grey, locked onto hers. Then I can't be responsible for what happens. Accidents happen in the canyon. Fires start. Wells go dry. People disappear. And a woman alone, harbouring a criminal, the law, he scoffed, would likely rule it a tragic misfortune. It was a death threat, clean and simple. I need time to think, Josie said, her voice trembling but defiant. You have until sundown, Dryden said. He placed the deed on the porch rail, weighting it with a rock. Sundown, or I will come back and take what is mine, and I will burn the rest. He turned and left. The silence he left behind was heavier and more terrifying than the storm. Josie slumped against the doorframe, her legs weak. It was over. She had to run. You should go, she said to Jonah. While you can. He means it. Jonah had pushed himself up onto one elbow. His face was pale with effort, but his eyes were clear. He means it, he agreed. And he's right about one thing. What's that? I am a man who crossed the wrong people. Him. Josie stared. You know him. I've known of him, Jonah corrected. I came here to investigate him, but Dryden has been robbing this territory blind for 10 years. Investigate, who are you? My name, he said, his voice gaining a hard metallic edge, is Jonah Gideon. I'm an auditor with the United States Treasury Department. Josie's blood ran cold. A bean counter. Of a sort, Jonah said. One that's backed by the full authority of the U.S. Marshals. I was sent by Governor Wallace himself. Dryden's been skimming territorial taxes, seizing land through fraudulent liens, your land included, I'd wager, and reporting it all as losses. But you were beaten, left for dead. I was ambushed, Gideon gritted out. Me and the 2 marshals escorting me. They knew I was coming. They were waiting for me at Red Creek Pass. They killed the marshals. I got away, but they ran me down. They took my horse and my papers, my gun. They beat me and left me in the wilderness to die. They just didn't count on your ranch being here. Josie's mind reeled. This wasn't a drifter. This was a federal agent. It doesn't matter, she said, her voice flat. You're half dead. I'm one woman. He has 20 guns. Sundown is in 3 hours. Jonah Gideon pushed himself to a sitting position, his face a mask of agony. Get me my boots, Miss Reed. What? Your shotgun. How many shells? Maybe 10. It'll have to do, he grunted. He swung his legs over the side of the cot. He stood swaying, one hand braced against the wall. His splintered ribs must have been screaming. You can't even stand, Josie whispered, horrified. He's not coming back with lawyers, Miss Reed. He's coming back with fire, Jonah said. We have 2 choices. We run and he hunts us down, or we make a stand. Here, it's suicide. It's a chance, he countered. He looked around the small cabin. The windows are small. The door is solid oak. It's a decent defensive position. Give me the shotgun. Josie looked at this battered, broken man who should have been dead. He was asking her to fight a war she couldn't win. But as she looked at him, she realized she was tired of running. This was her land. She handed him the shotgun. I'll load the rifle. The sun began to dip, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood orange and deep purple. The beauty of it was a mockery. They'll come from the front, Jonah said, his voice low. He was positioned in the dark corner of the cabin, where he could see the porch but not be seen from the window. The shotgun was heavy in his lap. "They'll expect you to be panicked. They'll probably try to talk first, then try to burn you out." "That's Hank's way," Josie agreed. She was by the side window, her own husband's hunting rifle in her hands. It was old, but it shot true. "When they get close," Jonah instructed, his breathing ragged, "you stay quiet. Let me handle the first introduction. Don't fire unless I do." The waiting was the worst part. The silence of the canyon was absolute. Every snap of a twig, every cry of a distant hawk made Josie jump. Then they heard it. The jingle of harnesses, the low murmur of men's voices. They appeared as silhouettes against the dusk. 6 of them. Hank was in the lead, a torch in one hand. "Josie!" Hank's voice boomed, falsely cheerful. "Time's up. Mr. Dryden sent us to collect the paperwork and to escort your friend to jail." They fanned out, creating a half circle in front of the cabin, just outside of pistol range. "We know you're in there, old woman," another man shouted, laughing. Josie's knuckles were white on the rifle. "Go away, Hank," she shouted, her voice shaking but loud. "This is my land. Not anymore, it ain't." Hank spurred his horse forward, stopping 30 yards from the porch. He held the torch high. "Last chance, Josie. Come on out or we burn you out, and we'll shoot anything that runs." Jonah was perfectly still. "A little closer," he whispered. Hank dismounted, torch in hand. He sauntered toward the porch. "I'm gonna enjoy this," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. He reached the first step. "That's far enough, Hank." Jonah's voice cut through the twilight. It wasn't the weak rasp of a sick man. It was cold, hard, and full of command. Hank froze. He squinted into the darkness of the cabin. "So the stray dog can bark. I'm not here for you, boy. I'm here for the—" Boom! The shotgun blast was deafening. It didn't hit Hank. Jonah had fired into the wooden porch post, just inches from Hank's head. The wood exploded, sending splinters into Hank's face. Hank screamed and fell backward, dropping the torch, which fizzled out in the damp dirt. "The next one goes in your gut," Jonah yelled. The other men, startled, drew their guns. "He's armed," one shouted. "He's one man, you idiots!" Hank shrieked, scrambling back. "He's half dead. Get him!" A pistol flashed, and a bullet thwacked into the log wall of the cabin. "Josie, the side window." "The 2 on the right," Jonah commanded. Josie raised her rifle, sighted on the man farthest to the right, and fired. The man grunted and fell from his saddle. She worked the lever action, her movements practiced, and sure. She fired again. The second man yelped and spurred his horse back into the darkness, clutching his arm. "Now you've done it!" Hank roared, pulling his own gun. He and the remaining 3 men took cover behind the rocks and the water trough, firing at the cabin. Bullets chewed through the windows, sending glass and wood splinters flying. Josie dropped to the floor, her heart hammering. "They're pinned," Jonah said, calm as ice. He reloaded the shotgun. "But they'll try the fire again. They'll try to get to the back." "The spring is back there," Josie said. "The walls are lower." "Cover the front," Jonah ordered. He grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and moved, crouching, to the back door. He was moving better now, the adrenaline surging through him. They heard a man scrambling over the low rock wall at the back. He had a can of kerosene. The back door was flimsy. The man kicked it. The latch held, but the wood cracked. He kicked it again. Josie fired her rifle out the front window, forcing Hank and the others to keep their heads down. The back door burst open. A burly man stood there, silhouetted, raising the kerosene can. "Time to burn, bitch!" Jonah moved with a speed that defied his injuries. He didn't use the shotgun. He swung the iron poker like a club. It connected with the man's knee with a sickening crack. The man howled and dropped. Jonah brought the poker down on his wrist, and the kerosene can fell. He dragged the groaning man inside and slammed the broken door shut, barring it with a heavy chest. He returned to the front room, breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat. 2 down. Outside, the remaining men were shouting, confused. "Hank!" Jonah bellowed, his voice echoing across the canyon. "You and your men are under arrest for the attempted murder of a federal officer." There was a stunned silence. "You're what?" Hank's voice was incredulous. "My name is Jonah Gideon, U.S. Treasury. You ambushed me at Red Creek. You murdered 2 U.S. Marshals. You tell Dryden that Auditor Gideon has his ledger, and I'm coming for him next." The silence that followed was absolute. The bluff, if it was won, was magnificent. They heard scrambling. "He's lying!" Hank shouted, but his voice was thin, panicked. "Am I?" Jonah roared. "Governor Wallace will want to know why his auditor's body is on your boss's land. You'll all hang, not just Dryden, all of you." The remaining men weren't paid enough for this. They weren't paid to fight the government. One man suddenly spurred his horse and galloped away into the night. "Coward!" Hank screamed. The second man followed, firing one wild shot over his shoulder before disappearing. Hank was left alone, crouched behind the water trough. He was trapped. "It's over! Hank!" Josie yelled. "Get out of here!" Hank was weeping now, a mixture of rage and terror. "You're dead, Reed! You're both dead! Dryden will send the whole town!" He scrambled to his horse, mounted, and fled, riding low, disappearing into the blackness. Josie and Jonah were left in the ruined, smoke-filled cabin. The silence returned heavier this time. Josie finally let out the breath she'd been holding for 3 days. "Auditor Gideon," she said, her voice shaking. "His ledger, you have it." Jonah slumped against the wall, the poker clattering from his hand. "No," he panted, the pain returning in a tidal wave. "I don't. I was hoping he kept one. But judging by Hank's reaction, I believe he does. And now he knows I'm alive. You bluffed. I did." He looked at her, his blue eyes sharp in the gloom. "And now, Ms. Reed, we have to go get it." "We can't," Josie said, staring at him. "You're wounded. They'll be watching the town. We're trapped here." "He'll send more men," Jonah countered, wincing as he tore a strip of cloth from his ruined shirt to bind his bleeding hand. "This time he won't send Hank. He'll send killers. Our only chance is to move first while he's disorganized, while he's scared. Move where to town you'll be shot before you hit the main street." "Not just to town. To the telegraph office," Jonah said. "I need to send one message, to Governor Wallace. If I can get that message out, this whole canyon will be swarming with federal marshals inside of a week." He looked at her, his expression grim. "But I can't ride. Not far. And they know my face." Josie understood. "They don't know mine, not like that. I'm just the crazy widow from the canyon." "Dryden will have told the telegraph operator who's on his payroll. I'm sure not to send any messages," Jonah reasoned. "But he'll be expecting me. He won't be expecting you." "I can't just walk in and send a telegram about a federal audit. They'll arrest me." "No," Jonah said, a flicker of a smile on his face. "You're going to send a message about cattle," he explained. It was desperate. It was brilliant. It was Josie thought almost certainly going to get her killed. She resaddled her own horse, a sturdy mare, and packed a few things. Jonah, using the man he'd disabled as a hostage, borrowed the man's horse. The man they'd shot outside was gone. He'd either been dragged off or had crawled away. "You're not coming with me," Josie said, seeing Jonah try to mount. "I'm not letting you go alone." He grunted, hauling himself into the saddle. Every movement was clearly agony. "I'll ride as far as the canyon ridge. I'll watch the town. If they try to stop you, I'll create a distraction. You'll be killed. "Then get the message out fast," he said simply. They rode under the cover of a sliver of moon, taking the high game trails, avoiding the main road. The ride was tense, every rock formation a potential ambush. Jonah rode, slumped over his body, swaying, but he never complained. They reached the ridge overlooking Dryden's Folly just before dawn. The town was a small collection of wooden buildings in the valley, dominated by one, Dryden's Saloon, and hotel a gaudy two-story affair. The telegraph office was a small shack next to the Land and Deed office, which of course Dryden also owned. "The operator's name is Finch," Jonah whispered, his voice weak. "He's a weasel. He'll report everything. But he's also a coward." "What's the message?" Josie asked. Jonah handed her a crumpled piece of paper and a small leather pouch, heavy with coins. "The message is on the paper. The money is to make sure he sends it exactly as written. Tell him it's a coded order for a cattle buyer in the capital. Tell him the price is non-negotiable." The message was gibberish, a string of words that made no sense. "Read spring water. High. Audit closed. Gideon reports fully. Wallace sends regards. 20 head. Urgent." "He'll know," Josie said. "He'll suspect," Jonah corrected. "But the key words are Wallace and Gideon, and audit closed. Dryden will have told him to watch for messages about an audit. This," Jonah tapped the paper, "says the audit is over. Finch will be afraid of crossing Dryden, but he'll be terrified of being on the wrong side of the governor. You're giving him an excuse to send it." Josie tucked the paper into her shirt. "If I'm not back in an hour, then ride Ms. Reed," Jonah said, his hand dropping to the pistol he'd taken from the man at the cabin. "Ride fast. Don't come back for me." Josie spurred her horse and started down the switchback trail to the town. She tied her horse outside the general store, not the telegraph office, and walked. The town was just waking up. Mr. Abernathy, the storekeeper, nodded to her, his eyes full of pity. He'd always been kind, but he too was under Dryden's thumb. She saw 2 of Dryden's men lounging outside the saloon. They watched her but didn't move. She was just Josie Reed coming to town for supplies. She walked into the telegraph office. A small, nervous man with a green eye shade. Finch looked up. "Ms. Reed, you're here early." "I need to send a message, Mr. Finch. Urgent," Josie said, putting on her best, frustrated rancher face. She slid the paper and the pouch of coins across the desk. Finch's eyes widened at the money. Then he read the message. All the color drained from his face. He looked up at her, his hands visibly shaking. I can't send this, Ms. Reed. This is nonsense." "It's a coded order," Josie snapped, leaning in. "For a buyer in the capital. He's paying double for my stock if I can confirm the order. You send that word for word, or you'll be costing me the sale of my ranch." "But, Mr. Dryden," he whispered, his eyes darting to the window. "Mr. Dryden doesn't sign my checks." Josie lied, her heart pounding. "This buyer, he works for powerful people. People who know Governor Wallace. I'd hate for them to hear that a small-town operator held up their business." Finch was trapped. He looked at the money. He looked at the message. He looked at Josie's hard, determined face. He swallowed. "Word for word, you say. Word for word. Now." Finch turned to his key and with a shaky hand began to tap. Click, clack, click. Click, clack, click. The seconds stretched into eternity. Outside, one of the men from the saloon, the one who had been at her cabin, spotted her through the window. He pointed. He started running toward the office. "Hurry!" Josie urged. Click, clack, click. The man burst through the door. "Finch, what are you doing? She's with the fugitive." Finch jumped back from the key, terrified. "He's sending a message to the governor," the man yelled, drawing his pistol. "Dryden will have your hide." I She—" Finch stammered. The man raised his pistol at Josie. "You're coming with me." Crack. The shot came from outside. The man grabbed his shoulder, screaming, and the pistol clattered to the floor. Jonah Gideon was standing in the middle of the street, pistol in hand, swaying on his feet, a ghost in the morning light. "He sent the message," Josie said, grabbing the man's fallen gun. She pointed it at Finch. "Finish it. Send message complete." Finch, crying now, frantically tapped the last few codes. "Now run," Josie said to him. Finch didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled out the back door. Josie backed out of the office, gun raised. Jonah was already slumping. She grabbed him, and they stumbled toward her horse. The whole town was awake now, windows opening, people staring. Bart Dryden burst from the saloon doors, his face purple with rage. "Stop them! Stop them! They're murderers!" But no one moved. They had all seen Jonah. They had seen the shot, and they had all heard the rumor that was now spreading like wildfire the man was a federal agent. "That woman is my prisoner!" Dryden roared. "She's a citizen under federal protection. Dryden!" Jonah bellowed his voice, carrying in the still morning air. He hauled himself onto Josie's mare, sitting behind her. "And you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and the murder of 2 U.S. Marshals." Dryden laughed, a ragged, ugly sound. "You and what army, Gideon? You're dead on your feet. The army is coming," Jonah said, his voice fading as he slumped against Josie's back. "The message is sent." Josie kicked the horse, and it bolted, galloping back up the main street and toward the canyon ridge, leaving a stunned, silent town behind. The ride back was a blur of dust and pain. Jonah Gideon had passed out, before they were halfway up the ridge, a dead weight against Josie's back. She had to tie him to her with a rope to keep him from falling off the saddle. When she reached the cabin, she half carried, half dragged him back inside. His wounds had reopened. He was pale as death, his breathing shallow. The stand at the town had taken the last of his strength. "You fool," she muttered, packing the shoulder wound the henchman's bullet had grazed. "You magnificent dying fool." She barricaded the door, but she knew it was useless. Dryden would come, not with 6 men, but with his entire private army. He had no choice now. He had to silence them both. Josie sat the rifle across her lap and waited for the end. She had sent the message. She had fought back. She had, for the first time since Robert died, felt like more than just a survivor. She felt proud, but she was also most likely about to die. The sun climbed to its zenith. The canyon was silent. Too silent. Then she heard it. Not the jingle of a small group of riders. This was a low rumble, a vibration in the earth. It was the sound of many horses moving fast. She peered through a crack in the window. They were coming. At least 30 riders fanned out at the mouth of her small valley. At the front, unmistakable on his palomino, was Bart Dryden. Beside him was Sheriff Brody, the lawman Dryden owned. This was it. Josie checked the load in her rifle. She looked at Jonah, still unconscious. "Well, Mr. Gideon," she whispered. "It was a good bluff." The riders stopped 100 yards out, a line of armed men, blocking all escape. Dryden trotted forward, a white flag in his hand, a parody of negotiation. "Josephine Reed," he boomed, "you are harboring a wanted fugitive and a murderer. I have a warrant for your arrest and his. Come out with your hands high." Josie laughed, a short, bitter sound. "A warrant? You're a little late for that, Bart." "Don't be a fool, woman," Sheriff Brody shouted, his voice nervous. "You're surrounded. We'll drag you out." "Then come and get us," Josie yelled back. Dryden lowered the flag. He looked back at his men. He raised his hand, about to give the order to charge. And then a new sound. A single clear bugle call echoing from the other side of the canyon, from the ridge behind the cabin. Dryden froze. His head snapped up. All the riders turned in their saddles. Lined up on the high ridge silhouetted against the bright blue sky was a column of blue uniformed soldiers. At their head was a man in a smart civilian suit mounted on a bay gelding. "Dryden," the man's voice roared, amplified by the canyon walls. "Stand down, your men." Dryden's face went from purple rage to ashen white. He knew that voice. "Governor! Wallace!" He stammered his voice, barely a whisper. The soldiers, a full platoon of U.S. cavalry, began to move down the trail, their sabers rattling their carbines ready. They didn't just outnumber Dryden's men, they outclassed them. Governor Wallace trotted his horse down to meet the stunned blockade. He stopped 20 feet from Dryden. "Sheriff Brody," the governor said, his voice ice, "you are relieved of your duties. Place your weapon on the ground and consider yourself in the custody of the United States Army." Brody, his hands shaking, did exactly that. Dryden's hired guns looked at each other. They were paid to bully ranchers, not to fight the U.S. Army. One by one, they let their rifles drop, raising their hands. "Bartholomew Dryden," the governor continued, "I received a most interesting telegram this morning, a confirmation that my auditor, Mr. Gideon, had closed his investigation. Governor, there's been a terrible mistake," Dryden said, trying to regain his composure, his oily smile returning. "This man, Gideon, is an imposter, a murderer. He killed 2 marshals." "He did he?" the governor said. "Then I wonder who these 2 men are." 2 men in dusters rode up beside the governor. They were bruised and bandaged, but very much alive. "Mr. Dryden," one said, pulling back his coat to show a marshal's badge. "We were wondering when you'd send someone to finish the job." Dryden's face crumpled. He had failed. His men had failed. "We were found by the cavalry patrol I'd sent to meet Mr. Gideon," the marshal explained. "We've been hunting you ever since. Gideon's message just told us where to look." The entire canyon, all of Dryden's men, all the hidden townsfolk who had ridden out to watch, were silent. They were staring at this one man, Bart Dryden, who had been their king, and he was in a single moment broken. Josie finally unbarred the cabin door and stepped out, blinking in the bright sun. Governor Wallace dismounted and walked toward her. "Mom, you must be Miss Reed. You've had a difficult few days." "He's inside," Josie said, her voice trembling. "He's hurt bad." The governor signaled, and a medic ran into the cabin. Dryden, seeing his entire world evaporate, made one last, desperate move. He screamed a high, thin sound of animal rage and drew his pistol. He wasn't aiming at the governor. He was aiming at Josie. He never fired. A single shot rang out from the doorway of the cabin. Dryden stiffened, a look of shocked surprise on his face. He looked down at the red stain spreading on his chest, then fell from his horse, dead in the dust. Josie turned. Jonah Gideon was leaning against the doorframe, the smoking pistol he'd taken from the henchman in his hand. He met her eyes. "Audit," he whispered, "closed." Then he collapsed. The silence that fell after the soldiers, the governor, and the prisoners departed was deeper than any Josie had ever known. It was a vacuum left by the sudden removal of a pressure that had defined her entire life in Serpent's Tooth Canyon. For 2 weeks the canyon held its breath. Jonah Gideon had been carried out on a stretcher by the army surgeon, his face pale, but his eyes, when they had flickered open to find hers, were alive. He was gone, taken to the capital to recover, before his inevitable recall to Washington. Bart Dryden was gone too, put into a pine box and buried in an unmarked grave at the edge of the town cemetery, a final unceremonious end to his reign. Federal agents and marshals, the ones who had arrived with the cavalry, swarmed the town. They seized the saloon, the land office, and the bank. They poured over ledgers their city suits and brisk efficiency, a stark contrast to the dusty, slow-paced fear that had ruled before. The large, gaudy sign that read, "Dryden's Folly," was taken down, leaving a pale scar on the building's facade. The town, it seemed, was holding a quiet, confused wake for its own captivity. Josie's life, however, remained rooted in the earth. She still had to mend the bullet-riddled fences. She still had to clear the debris from her spring. She still had to sweep the glass from her cabin floor. The cabin itself was a ruin of splintered wood and broken windows, a testament to the stand they had made. She worked from dawn until dusk, the physical labor a balm for her rattled nerves. She was alone again, but the quality of the loneliness had changed. The ever-present thrum of fear was gone, and in its place was a vast, echoing emptiness. She had won, but she wasn't sure what that meant. One morning, a full month after the shootout, she saw a wagon approaching. It wasn't soldiers. She reached for her rifle, a reflexive habit before recognizing the stooped figure of Mr. Abernathy from the general store. He was with 2 other local ranchers' men who had previously avoided her gaze. Men who had bowed to Dryden. Josie stood on her porch, her arms crossed, waiting. Abernathy stopped the wagon and climbed down, twisting his hat in his hands. He looked at the pockmarked cabin walls, then at her, and his face was a mixture of shame and awe. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice quiet. We came to apologize." Josie's expression didn't soften. "For what, Mr. Abernathy?" "For knowing a rancher named Peters," said, stepping forward. He was a big man, but he seemed small just then. "We all knew what Dryden was. We knew he was strangling you, strangling all of us. We were just too scared to stand. We let you take the wind for all of us, Miss Reed. We let you and that federal man stand alone. We were cowards," Abernathy said, his voice cracking. "And you were brave. And, we'd like to fix what we let happen." He gestured to the wagon. Josie saw it was piled high with fresh-cut lumber, new window panes, boxes of shingles, and heavy bags of seed and grain. "The whole town chipped in," Peters said, his gaze finally meeting hers. "It ain't charity, Mom. It's a debt, the first of many. We'd be honored if you'd let us repair your cabin." Josie looked at the men at their earnest, ashamed faces. She looked at the lumber, and for the first time since Robert died, she felt the sting of tears. She quickly blinked them away. "Well," she said, her voice rough, "don't just stand there holding your hats. That roof won't fix itself." Abernathy's answering smile was one of profound relief. For 3 days the canyon echoed with the sounds of hammers and saws, a sound of construction, not destruction. The men of the valley, the same men who had cowered before Dryden's hired guns, worked on her small cabin. They replaced the splintered door. They patched the bullet holes. They set new clear glass in the windows. They rebuilt her fences, stronger than before. It wasn't just carpentry. It was an atonement paid in sweat and timber. It was the canyon mending itself. During that time, the town council met. Dryden's Folly. A name of mockery and submission was officially stricken from the territorial maps. They renamed the town Reed's Hope, after her husband's grandfather, the man who had first seen potential in the valley. On the 3rd day, as the men were packing their tools, another rider approached. This man was different. He was thin, wore a dark city suit, and rode a horse awkwardly, as if it were a foreign beast. He was leading a magnificent black stallion, an animal with a proud head and powerful limbs identical to the one she had been forced to put down. He dismounted, wincing slightly, and approached Josie, holding out a thick envelope. "Ms. Josephine Reed?" he asked, his voice crisp. "I am. My name is Mr. Allen from the governor's office. This is for you." He handed her the envelope. I was also instructed to deliver this animal. He comes by way of Mr. Jonah Gideon, who has recovered, and I'm told has been recalled to Washington. Mr. Gideon asked me to tell you the horse's name is Justice." The man bowed stiffly, remounted his own horse, and rode away, clearly eager to be off the frontier. Josie stood with the stallion's reins in one hand and the letter in the other. Justice. A small, dry smile touched her lips. Gideon had a flair for the dramatic, after all. She waited until the ranchers had left, until the sun began to dip, painting the canyon in the same bloody oranges it had on the day of the siege. She sat on her new solid porch and opened the letter. Inside were 2 documents. The first was the deed to her land. Across the bottom, in bold black ink, it was stamped, "Free and clear of all lines and encumbrances," by order of the U.S. Territorial Governor. The second was a letter written in a strong, clear hand. "Ms. Reed, I find myself in a city of marble, surrounded by men who believe they understand the world. But my thoughts are in a cabin of wood with a woman who truly does. I have been called a hero by politicians and newspapers. They are wrong. A hero isn't the man with the army at his back. A hero is the person who, when faced with an evil that darkens the sun, and standing utterly alone, chooses not to run. You saved my life, Josie. I will never forget that. But you did more than that. You saved the soul of that canyon. You reminded them what it means to stand for something. Mr. Abernathy will have the details of the substantial reward lodged by the U.S. Treasury for your role in the apprehension of Bartholomew Dryden and the recovery of stolen territorial funds. It is not a gift. It is payment for services rendered, services I could not have completed without you. I hope the horse is a suitable replacement for the fine animal lost in my service. I doubt he is half as strong, or has half the spirit of the woman who will ride him. Be well, Josie. Your friend Jonah Gideon." Josie folded the letter, her hand trembling slightly. She walked over to Justice, who nudged her hand, his eyes intelligent and kind. She looked out over the canyon, her home. The next Sunday she rode Justice into Reed's Hope. She needed supplies, but more than that, she needed to see. The town was alive, the street busy. As she rode past the general store, Mr. Abernathy came out and nodded, a smile touching his face. Further down, a group of ranchers stood outside the saloon, which was now under new, quiet management. They saw her. They stopped talking. One by one, they respectfully, slowly removed their hats. Across the street, Mrs. Peters, the rancher's wife, stopped and nodded to her. It wasn't a bow of fear, the kind they had all been forced to give Dryden a gesture of submission to a petty tyrant. This was different. This was a bow of respect. The entire canyon, which had once bent to a man who took, now bowed to the quiet, stubborn woman who had refused to be broken. Josie Reed, no longer a victim, no longer a widow, hiding in the rocks, sat tall in her saddle and rode on. That's the story of Josie Reed and the auditor who collapsed at her door. It's a reminder that true strength isn't about the power you hold over others. It's about the courage you find within yourself when you have no power at all. It's about that moment when running is the easy choice, but you plant your feet anyway. Josie wasn't a gunslinger or a politician. She was just a woman who refused to break, and in doing so, she gave an entire community its backbone back. What did you think of Josie's courage? Have you ever faced a moment where standing your ground seemed impossible? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, please hit that like button so we know to make more just like it. Share this video with someone who needs a story of true grit. And most importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so you never miss another real-life story of drama justice and the quiet heroes who walk among us.